Hey everybody, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. It's a hot August morning in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Reverend C.H. North, pastor of the Third Pentecostal Church, has pulled his car to the curb downtown and climbed out into the summer heat. He has to be somewhere. He has something to do. He is, in every meaningful way, just a man running an errand. He notices the metal post planted in the sidewalk near his front bumper, one of those new coin-operated parking devices the city had installed a few weeks back. He checks his pockets, no change. He isn't worried about it, he just needs a minute. He'll duck into the nearest store, grab some change, come right back. The ticket underneath his windshield wiper is waiting for him when he returns. He's annoyed, understandably. He'd been gone for barely a minute, and he'd been trying to pay the thing. Later, he takes the case before a judge, explains exactly what happened, and the judge lets him go. As far as Reverend North is concerned, the whole episode is a minor injustice on an otherwise ordinary summer morning. You know, the kind of thing you can complain about at dinner and mostly forget by the following week. What he doesn't know, standing on that sidewalk with a parking ticket in his hand, is that this has never happened before. Not once, not anywhere on earth. No one in history had ever received a parking meter violation until that morning, because the machines had only existed for about a month. So how does a city go from free curb parking to coin-operated meters in a matter of months, with half of the drivers filing lawsuits and the other half demanding more of the meters? How does one nickel dropped into a spring-wound machine built by a company that normally timed explosions in oil wells end up reshaping how every city in America thinks about public space and who gets to use it? And how did all of that start on July 16, 1935, when 175 small metal posts went into the ground along 14 blocks of downtown Oklahoma City, and a mechanism nobody had asked for became one that nobody would ever be able to get rid of? From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain the stories that changed business forever. Every date on the calendar has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, July 16th, that story takes us to 1935, the nickel that changed the city. The parking problem in downtown Oklahoma City in the early 1930s looked like a congestion problem, but it wasn't. It was actually a turnover problem, and that distinction is the whole story. By 1930, Oklahoma County had roughly 500,000 registered vehicles, up from about 3,000 in 1913. Downtown streets built for horses and foot traffic were now absorbing the daily commute of an entire city's workforce, and those workers parked as close to their offices as they could get, and they stayed there all day. By the time the shoppers arrived, the good spots were taken. Customers started drifting toward businesses outside of downtown, places with easier access and fewer blocks to walk, and downtown merchants were watching their foot traffic drain away without fully understanding why. The Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce formed a traffic committee in 1932 to find a solution, and they put a man by the name of Carl McGee in charge of it. McGee was a lawyer and a newspaper publisher who had come to Oklahoma City from New Mexico 5 years earlier to run a paper called the Oklahoma News. He was not an engineer, but he identified the problem correctly from the start. Employees had no incentive to move their cars, so they didn't. What the city needed wasn't more parking space. It needed a reason for people to leave. McGee's answer was to put a price on time. A coin-operated device mounted to the curb, 1 hour for a nickel, with a meaningful fine waiting for anyone who overstayed. The fine created the incentive. The incentive created turnover. Turnover created available spaces. Available spaces brought customers back. The logic was clean, and it worked on paper before it worked anywhere else. Getting from idea to installation took 3 years. McGee ran a design competition, found no submissions that actually worked, and hired 2 engineering professors to build a proper model instead. The prototype they produced was nicknamed the Black Maria. For manufacturing, he turned to the MacNick Company of Tulsa, Oklahoma, a firm whose main business was making timing devices to detonate nitroglycerin in oil wells. The same mechanism that triggered underground explosions in the Oklahoma oil fields would now tell a driver that their hour was up. On July 16, 1935, 175 park-o-meters went into the ground along 14 blocks of downtown Oklahoma City. 1 nickel, 1 hour, one $20 fine if you lingered too long. The public reaction was immediate, and it was not polite. Some drivers filed lawsuits, arguing the meters were an unconstitutional tax, forcing citizens to pay for access to a public street they had always used for free. Letters to the editor in the Daily Oklahoman, Oklahoma City's main newspaper, made clear that plenty of residents considered this an outrage. At least one man made his objection theatrical, riding a horse into downtown and tying it to a meter post to demonstrate that the city had no legitimate claim on curb space. The backlash was loud, and it was organized, and it accomplished almost nothing. Because on the other side of the street, something different was happening. The spaces in front of downtown stores were turning over. Customers were finding spots close to the places they wanted to shop. Sales were moving. Merchants on the blocks that hadn't received meters yet began pushing the city to install them. Not in a few months, but immediately, because they could already see what the turnover was doing for the businesses that had them. That split reaction is the mechanism of this story in plain view. The people paying the nickel experienced it as a cost imposed on them. The people selling goods experienced it as a customer delivery system someone else was paying for. Both groups were responding rationally to their own position, and the merchants had more economic leverage than the protesters did. By the end of 1935, nearly 300 additional meters had gone into the ground across downtown Oklahoma City. The lawsuits went nowhere. The horse protest became a footnote. The meters stayed, and the fine stayed, and a downtown that had spent years calcifying into an all-day employee parking lot had, in the span of a few months, become something that actually worked for the people spending their money there. By the early 1940s, more than 140,000 parking meters were operating across the United States, city by city and block by block, because the turnover math was difficult to argue with once merchants had seen it work. New York City held out until 1951, 16 years after Oklahoma City, which says something about the difficulty of changing anything in a place where everyone already has a strong opinion about parking. Something else happened along the way, though. Cities noticed that the nickel wasn't just a turnover mechanism. It was also revenue. Meters generated steady income for municipal budgets in a way that chalk-marked tires and occasional fines never had, and that revenue angle gradually became the dominant public framing. The original purpose, turnover for the benefit of downtown merchants, got buried under decades of parking enforcement culture. The two goals aren't incompatible, but they aren't the same goal either. A city optimizing for revenue and a city optimizing for turnover will make different decisions, and sometimes the city chasing revenue ends up recreating the exact problem McGee was hired to solve. The technology has changed completely since 1935. The spring-wound nickel slot is gone, replaced by pay stations and mobile apps and license plate readers and dynamic pricing systems that adjust the rate by the hour depending on demand. The nickel is gone. The mechanism isn't. You are still buying time in a space, and that space still turns over when the time runs out. What McGee built in 1932 is still running, just without the coin. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you want to actually understand business better without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language, start by visiting us at businessdailypodcast.com.